There's change coming once and for all. You makes the front page.
The Walt Disney Company greatly influenced Broadway, as did David T. Nederlander and the Schubert Brothers. Disney Theatrical Productions is a subgroup of Disney Theatrical Group that oversees all of Disney's live entertainment outside the parks. Disney Theatrical Productions currently has around 22 productions presented around the world. But before we look at Disney's Broadway shows, we have to go all the way back to the beginning. How did the Walt Disney Company, a company that brands itself on family entertainment, get involved with Broadway and Times Square during a time in the 1980s when Broadway wasn't as glamorous? For that, we have to go all the way back to the 1980s with Mayor Ed Kotch. In the 1980s, Mayor Ed Kotch pushed the 10-year capital plan. This plan used New York City's capital funds to push over 100,000 units of in-rem housing, which are properties that the city has acquired because of property tax foreclosure. His plan was to revitalize New York City to provide affordable housing and better living conditions in the area. However, this plan not only helped the city with its housing, but also helped New York City economically. The driving force behind Ed Kotch's plan paved the way for ideas in the future that would lead to the cleanup of Times Square and 42nd Street. So you ask yourself where Disney fits in all of this. Well, when developers were revitalizing 42nd Street, for entertainment they looked no further than the Walt Disney Company. Robert Stern was one of the first to reach out to the Walt Disney Company. He was a famous postmodern architect and friends with the current CEO of Disney at the time, Michael Eisner. He also had Eisner in mind to help with the city's restoration, especially with Michael Eisner growing up in New York City around Park Avenue. Even though Michael Eisner was approached several times about the 42nd Street project, he was unwilling to participate due to the current state the Walt Disney Company was in when he was appointed CEO. The company was in a transitional period in the 1980s. They never really recovered from the death of Walt Disney in 1966 and his brother Roy Disney passing away not soon after in 1971. The former CEO of rival Paramount Pictures, Michael Eisner, was hired to lead the Walt Disney Company in 1984. Michael Eisner received mixed criticism at best while he was CEO for the Walt Disney Company. However, you have to give him credit because he led the company through one of the toughest decades in Disney history. Films released by Disney at the time, including The Black Cauldron, The Fox and the Hound, and The Great Mouse Detective, were all considered commercial failures. There was even an attempt at a hostile takeover of the Walt Disney Company by a businessman named Saul Steinberg. It would make sense that, even though Michael Eisner might have had a vision for the New York City project at the time, he wouldn't be looking for ventures outside the Disney Company because the company was so fragile in the state it was in the 1980s. The good news is that once it reached 1989, things got better for the Walt Disney Company. The animated films started getting better in quality and content, and they started reaching box office success again, in a period we know now as the Disney Renaissance.
It's a motion picture about friendship.
Get easy! Please, Eddie! Don't tell me I'm making a big mistake!
Love.
While the Disney Renaissance really began with the critical success of Who Framed Roger Rabbit, the module for Disney animated classics for the next decade would receive help from Broadway talent. One of Michael Eisner's first hires as CEO was theatrical producer Peter Schneider. He was one of the men responsible for the Disney Renaissance behind the creation of The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, The Lion King, and Aladdin.
Proud of your boy, I'll make you proud of your boy. Believe me, bad as I've been, while you're in for a pleasant surprise.
While Peter Schneider served as the president of Walt Disney Feature Animation, he started making a decision to hire more theatrical talent. Two of the artists he chose were the writing team behind the musical Little Shop of Horrors, lyricist Howard Ashman and composer Alan Menken. They began working on Disney's adaptation of the Hans Christian Andersen story, The Little Mermaid, by approaching it like they would a Broadway musical. The format Disney used of treating animated features like stage productions, using theatrical talent, led to huge critical and commercial success. This gained Disney 2 Academy Award nominations for Ashman and Menken's music.
Ever as before, ever
just as sure as the sun will rise.
Their second project with Disney was the 1991 animated film, Beauty and the Beast. The film quickly outperformed The Little Mermaid and became the first animated film to ever be nominated for Best Picture. Beauty and the Beast became the highest grossing animated film in history at the time. With all the success that Beauty and the Beast had after its release, the idea was brought back to Michael Eisner to bring a show like Beauty and the Beast to Broadway. However, once again being nervous about the project, Michael Eisner turned it down. Michael Eisner never really changed his mind. He never changed his mind until the film review came out of Beauty and the Beast by New York Times film critic Frank Rich. Rich, along with other critics, saw the film's live musical potential. Uninterested by the current shows on Broadway at the time, he praised the Disney film as the best Broadway musical score of 1991, and a better musical than anything he had seen on Broadway. This review gave Michael Eisner the motivation to finally consider adapting Beauty and the Beast to the stage. However, Eisner still had reservations about the current state of Times Square. This brings us back to that development project I talked about earlier involving Ed Kotch. The touristy epicenter of Times Square and 42nd Street we know today looks nothing like the area did in the 80s and early 90s. Times Square was full of criminals and drug dealers, pornographic movies, and peep shows. Michael Eisner would not bring a Disney production to an area that was not safe for a family audience. Michael Eisner went to then-Mayor Rudy Giuliani in order to get a commitment to clean up Times Square. And this is what that conversation was like.
I had a little concern about the adjacent nightlife, and he said it'll be gone. I said, well, Mr. Mayor, you know, there is the American Civil Liberties Union. I mean, they're just not gone. He said, look me in the eye. I said, what? He said, look me in the eye. I said, okay. He said, they will be gone. Scared me. I guess they were going to be gone.
The plans were underway, and under Michael Eisner and Mayor Rudy Giuliani, other companies like ABC Studios, Planet Hollywood, and Hershey's all moved into the area. We can thank the Walt Disney Company for making Times Square into the neon mecca and center of the world it is today. In 1993, Disney Theatrical Productions was founded, and on April 18, 1994, Disney's first Broadway production, Beauty and the Beast, opened at the Palace Theater in the heart of Times Square. Michael Eisner was pleased with all the success Disney was having in New York City. However, in order to have future achievements on Broadway, Disney knew they would have to find their own theater for their future productions to call home. In 1993, the Nederlander and Schubert organizations owned most of the theaters in New York City, but Disney was looking to cash in on the Broadway theater ownership. One theater they had in mind was the abandoned New Amsterdam Theater on 42nd Street. Originally home to Ziegfeld's famous Follies in the early 1900s, the New Amsterdam was a landmark in early Broadway entertainment. However, it closed when the live theater industry was hit during the Great Depression, and later opened as a movie theater in 1937. The roof garden above the New Amsterdam housed a rehearsal space during the time for original productions of Gypsy and Camelot and My Fair Lady that would star the upcomer and future Disney star Julie Andrews.
Somewhere far away from the cold night air, with one enormous chair, now wouldn't it be lovely?
In 1982, the New Amsterdam Theater was acquired by the Nederlander organization. However, they never put any plans in to actually restore the theater. The state and city of New York took ownership of many theaters, including the New Amsterdam Theater, in 1990. This was after several court proceedings that were a part of former Mayor Ed Koch's development plan. With the New Amsterdam now up for grabs, we go back to our architect friend, Robert Stern. Stern took Eisner on a tour of the New Amsterdam Theater, which had fallen into ruin. However, even with the crumbling facade, seeing the theater's historical charm sparked Michael Eisner's imagination, and the plans were set in motion to revitalize the theater. On February 2, 1994, Disney announced plans to remodel and reopen the New Amsterdam Theater on 42nd Street. In May 1995, Disney Theatrical Productions would sign a 49-year revenue-based lease on the New Amsterdam Theater, and it would take millions of dollars in renovations in order to get the theater up and running again. The New Amsterdam officially reopened on April 2nd, 1997, and in November of that year housed the film premiere of the recent animated film Hercules. Beauty and the Beast ran at the Powell's Theater until September 5th, 1999. The show then transferred to the Lou Fontaine Theater on November 11th with an official opening date of November 16th, 1999. Disney Theatrical had a hit show under their belt. However, what would be the next musical that would inhabit the newly renovated New Amsterdam Theater? I mean, what production could possibly top Beauty and the Beast? That will be the subject of my next video on Disney on Broadway, as we look at Disney's most successful musical to this day, The Lion King. I'll see you next time.